So Isle of Armor is the first piece of Game Freak Pokemon DLC ever. In the past, Game Freak would typically re-release the exact same game but with some additional add-ons for full price. While the business practice is pretty scummy, it did introduce some beloved Pokemon features like the Battle Frontier. What does Isle of Armor have to add for its $15 price tag? When you first boot up the game, you are given an Armor Pass which grants you access to Armor Island. Unfortunately, the entire island doesn't actually scale to your level, despite early reports claiming otherwise. It simply scales to the number of badges you have. This wouldn't have been much of an issue if this DLC dropped a few days after the game came out, but it's been a few months now. Most people at this point have entire teams of level 100s, and all you need is literally one Pokemon at level 100 to run through the entire island. I simply used my Toxtricity the entire time and had zero issues. The lack of level scaling is disappointing to say the least, and this leads to non-existent difficulty. Your first few steps on the Isle of Armor, you are greeted by a glorious, fully scaled Wailord in the distance, which is an amazing sight. A shame they are unable to render all Pokemon at similar distances, as the game would feel a lot more immersive with a more convincing world. That Wailord, to my knowledge, is the highest level non-legendary wild Pokemon, sitting at level 80. Careful with defeating it, however, as I haven't found a way to make it respawn without creating an entirely new save. You are mistakenly enrolled in a dojo on the island who is owned by Mustard, a mentor of Leon. What's bizarre is that none of the characters know who you are, or acknowledge the fact that you beat the unbeatable champion. When you defeat Mustard for the first time, he's surprised, and the people in the dojo even refer to you as a newbie and they don't recognize you, which is ridiculous since in the post-game of Sword and Shield you're referred to as the champion. I appreciated the acknowledgements of my accomplishments. All of that is completely gone in the DLC. This lends itself to the credibility of the idea that the content in the Isle of Armor is cut content from the original game, and is simply being sold back to consumers. After you defeat Mustard, you must start the dojo training regiment, which consists of 3 trials, and the person who successfully completes all 3 will earn the dojo secret armor. The first trial is a comical chase against obscenely fast Galarian Slowpoke. Unfortunately, the Slowpoke are locked into circular paths, so you don't really need to chase them. You just simply need to intersect with their loop, and they will eventually run into you. The Egg Thief from Spyro the Dragon back in 1998, over 22 years ago, on the PlayStation 1 had more sophisticated AI and would actively attempt to avoid the player to prevent their capture. After you defeat all of the Galarian Slowpoke, you take on trial number 2, which requires you to find Max Mushrooms, a secret recipe for Max Soup that grants certain Pokemon the ability to Gigantamax. The only hint to their location was that they grow in dark, humid places, obviously referring to caves, and that was it. Mustard walks off and leaves you to it. I was actually impressed that the game didn't hold your hand past that, and was willing to allow you to explore the island on your own to locate the mushrooms yourself. Until Mustard remembered that he's in a Pokemon game, so right as you were about to play the game, he rushes towards you in order to hold your hand by showing you exactly where to go. Disappointing. The third challenge is a battle against your rival on the island. Clara for Sword and that other guy for Shield. Clara being the objectively superior option for reasons. Sword bros keep on winning. A neat thing about this fight is that Clara actually cheats. She lays out toxic spikes around your team to give herself an edge. This reminded me of the Leon Rumors pre-Sword and Shield release, where it was speculated that he was a phony champion who cheated his way to the top. Fun fact, on the back of Mustard's league card it says he quit the league long ago after the chairman at the time asked him to win a rigged match, which shares strikingly similar elements to the leaked pre-release Sword and Shield plot. Either a crazy coincidence, or maybe Game Freak had different plans for the story. We may never know. Either way, I appreciate Game Freak entertaining different approaches to battles, but sadly Clara's shady tactics were rendered obsolete due to my Toxtricity, who is part poison type, absorbing all of her toxic spikes and brutally foiling her plan. Didn't make a difference either way since I was only going to use one Pokemon anyways due to the lack of level scaling, but amusing nonetheless. Avery's cheat tactic is much more effective as he lays out a psychic terrain that boosts his Pokemon's psychic powers. I would appreciate more match manipulation like this in future content, as it can be a great way to flesh out characters and drive the plot. After you obliterate the rival's level 60 Pokemon with your level 100, you finally gain access to the secret armor, which is a new legendary Pokemon called Kubfu. You need to have Kubfu warm up to you by taking it around to various hotspots on the island. After you do that, you can finally challenge the 2 towers on the island, Tower of Water and Tower of Darkness, but you can only pick one. Doing so simply dictates what form Kubfu will take when it evolves into Urshifu. Darkness Tower grants you single strike style Urshifu, who is fighting Dark type, and Water Tower grants you Rapid Strike style Urshifu, who is fighting Water type. Both also have different signature attacks. The towers themselves are rather unremarkable. An inconvenience they present is that your Kubfu needs to be around level 70 in order to tackle it successfully. The Kubfu you are given is level 10, which is 60 levels under the suggested level. It's quite frankly a slog to grind up that many levels, even with the help of the new Experience Charm that serves to boost the mandatory experience share. I attempted to grind off of wild Pokemon until I realized I had a bunch of rare candies sitting in my bag. One weird thing about the island that felt off is that there are no traditional trainer battles. A neat way to get around the level grinding issue was to have you fight dojo apprentices littered around the island that gave you a massive boost in experience, but only if you had Kubfu alone in your party. Perhaps Game Freak failed to address this grinding issue because you were originally supposed to have Kubfu join you on your Pokemon quest and only return to the towers as post-game content, which again supports the cut content speculation. As for the towers themselves, they're virtually identical. The water and dark towers contain trainers with a single water or dark type Pokemon respectively. You must climb up 5 stories, each of which hold a trainer with a single Pokemon that you need to beat in order to advance. The final floor has Mustard challenge you with his own Kubfu. He drops his old man facade and basically goes Super Saiyan, which was really fun to watch. You beat Mustard again and are given the opportunity to evolve your Kubfu into Urshifu. Rapid Strike style Urshifu's signature water attack, Surging Strikes, is the single best animated multi-hit attack in the game. Most, if not all, of the multi-hit attacks aren't even animated, yet they went all out on this one and it honestly looks amazing. Single Strike's Wicked Blow is also very satisfying to land. You return to the dojo to find that Hop has come to the Isle of Armor to further research on Dynamax as Sonya's assistant. This part of the expansion falls in line with the idea that the towers are post-game content, as it takes place canonically after you defeat Leon, once again supporting the idea that this content was cut from the base game. Turns out that Urshifu can Gigantamax as well, but hates mushrooms and prefers honey. So you go on a strange fetch quest where Hop licks unknown liquids off of your hair, like literally. Hop remembers that honey comes from bees, and so you head off to find some Vespiquen. But not just any Vespiquen, a Dynamax Vespiquen hiding in a tree that sucks you into a random nearby Pokemon den. Makes no sense, but okay. You beat it to get some max honey, allowing Urshifu to Gigantamax. Dojo Master Mustard then challenges you to a serious battle out back. You completely invalidate his entire team with a single level 100 Pokemon of your choosing, and that's the end of the Isle of Armor. Story-wise, it's equivalent to a couple of generic side quests you'd find in any RPG. It's at least more enjoyable than the Royal Twin postgame found in the base game. The strongest part of the DLC is the exploration aspect of it. This is how I expected Sword and Shield to be from the beginning. Having every single area be like the wild area is a precedent that I believe Game Freak will utilize going forward. If Gen 9 plays like Isle of Armor, it will be a very enjoyable experience. The island itself is significantly larger and way more interesting than the wild area in every way. It has actual biomes that are split up in realistic ways. You can find a large marsh, a lush forest, an isolated desert, and most of these are split up by an intertwining cave system that has various different exits. The entire island is surrounded by large bodies of water that are mostly explorable until you hit the invisible walls at the edges. Frames do drop heavily when moving from one area to another or when a weather effect becomes active. Some of the textures are certainly a step up from the wild area, but are still quite underwhelming in places, especially the caves. Thankfully, modders are able to inject more life into these areas to make the overall experience more enjoyable to play. A nice addition that promotes exploration is a mini side quest where you need to track down 150 Alolan Diglets for a dude that somehow misplaced every single one of them. At least they gave a somewhat reasonable explanation for why a native Alolan Pokemon found its way to Galar. The Diglets are basically Koroks from Breath of the Wild, but without any of the interesting puzzles, clever hiding spots, or creativity of any kind. The rewards for collecting them are the different Alolan Pokemon. There are a ridiculous amount of items spread out across the island, to an excessive degree, so much so that I just ignored them after a while. Every inch of the island is inhabited by tons of beloved old faces. One benefit of the Dex Cut is that when old Pokemon make a return, they feel new and exciting again. It's a joy to run around seeing tons of old favorites from past titles. Seeing a bunch of Sandile in the desert, Krookodile being one of my favorites, was elating, and reminded me of the desert resort back in Unova, albeit significantly less interesting comparatively, as it's just a box full of sand. They introduced new move tutors that require new currency that teach new moves. Most of these moves are buffed to terrain styles of play, which is a huge boon for the impending Tapu takeover once Crown 100 drops. You also get access to new hairstyles and clothes. The bike gets a slight makeover and now comes with particle effects, which are embellishments I could get used to. The new bike uniform is also less offensive to the eyes, even if it's still mandatory and replaces your customized clothing options. For the dojo itself, you can upgrade it by spending tons of your watts. Honey is kind of like a secret boss you can fight after spending a certain amount of watts, which is a great use of that currency, and a nice treat for those who take the time to collect that large amount of watts that you need. They also added a way to use Apricorns via Cramomatic that give players access to the Apricorn balls. Game Freak reintroduced follow Pokemon with the Isle of Armor expansion. While I like that the feature makes a return, it was implemented in the worst way possible and there are many glaring issues. First and foremost is that this mechanic is locked behind a paywall. I predicted as such back in January. Before we know it, we will need to pay for our Pokemon to follow us. You literally have to pay additional cash in order for your Pokemon to follow you. Unlike Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Let's Go, where you get access to follow Pokemon out of the box. And in those games, your Pokemon could follow you wherever you went. In Sword and Shield, the follow mechanic is exclusively limited to Armor Island. You can't have your Pokemon follow you anywhere else in the game except that one island, which makes no sense at all. Speaking of Let's Go, they took the follow system from Let's Go and downgraded it in every conceivable way. A large majority of the Pokemon are way too slow. Some Pokemon are simply incapable of reasonably following you at all. In Let's Go, when Pokemon fall behind, they played a neat little Pokeball animation. This helps to keep the feature consistent and enjoyable. In Sword and Shield, they constantly teleport to you, which is jarring and shatters immersion and investment in the world. In Let's Go, the follow Pokemon UI is seamless. You can select any Pokemon in your party to follow you at any time, anywhere, and it's trivial to toggle them in or out of their Pokeballs regardless of where you are. In Sword and Shield, only the very first Pokemon in your party can follow you, and the only way to toggle it on or off is to talk to this kid in the kitchen of the dojo. You also cannot ride any of your Pokemon like you could in Let's Go, despite how amazing that would be while traversing the Isle of Armor, utilizing its rotational camera. This mechanic was clearly poorly implemented, with most of the innovations present in Let's Go removed entirely in Sword and Shield. It's a literal downgrade in every way. The follow feature seems like it was lazily slapped together last minute as additional padding to further incentivize and coax consumers into forking up that $30 for the expansion. They didn't have the player's best interest in mind when including it, otherwise it would have been tested more thoroughly and / improved upon for past titles. There's a new battle tower-like feature called Restricted Sparring that you can access from the dojo after you beat the Isle of Armor main story. It's a more restricted version of the battle tower, hence the name, because you are forced to use Pokemon of the same type and you can only heal your Pokemon up to 2 times. They won't be automatically healed for you after every battle. Other than that, it's the exact same as the battle tower, except there's no super boss trainer, just the same 2 generic NPCs. It doesn't help that they are all completely invalidated by Dynamax. Even if you are restricted to a single type, Dynamax is so broken that the type restriction doesn't really matter in the end. They dropped a little bit of foreshadowing for the upcoming Crown Tundra expansion. Hop says that Sonya went somewhere cold, and Crown Tundra has been shown to be filled with snow. Mustard, after you beat him for the final time, alludes that they need to train together more often to become stronger, in order to be ready for when the time comes, and assures the player will know what he's referring to eventually. Maybe some kind of crazy threat or doomsday event will play out in Crown Tundra. All in all, the expansion so far is an okay minus. If you're a fan of the wild area, then you will really appreciate the Isle of Armor. If you didn't enjoy base Sword and Shield, then there's nothing really for you added here that would sway you in any significant way. Did you get the expansion? If so, what was your favorite part? Make sure to leave your thoughts down below. Thanks for watching, you guys.